Let's talk about politics, shall we? Labour is losing urban Liberals but winning marginal Tories is the line the papers are spinning today. And there are already, I would suggest, lots of fascinating things to discuss with regard to the next election. And the Prime Minister hasn't even named the date yet. I suppose that's one of them. We could talk about the polls. Never in my life have I seen opinion polls like them. What was it Ian Duncan Smith said the other day about people's anger and loathing coming through. Fair play, at least he recognises it. But today I really want to hear what you make of voting trends, because I would suggest a clear trend, as clear as these things can be, shows that Labour winning Tory marginals, okay, but not doing so well in urban areas where it used to be strong. The latest poll analysis carried in the Sunday Times, it's of an MRP poll, shows Labour winning a 154-seat majority with a vote share close to Corbyn's in 2017, which is 40% if I recall. But while seat-by-seat analysis finds Labour on course to pick up a veritable army of 403 MPs, the party's apparently losing votes in some of its safer seats, down in more than 50-odd constituencies compared with 2019, which is interesting. Anyone like to venture why is my first question. 0345 6060 973. If you're a traditional Labour voter in an urban area which has traditionally been a Labour stronghold, what's going on? Give us a call. More broadly, the poll suggests that while Labour is making modest ground in areas it already holds, we're talking around 3 points up, it's doing better in seats held by the Conservatives, where it's up more than 8 points. And I thought Keir Starmer would be chuffed to hear that. Hanging on to what you've got, gaining where you've previously lost. So again, we must talk to Tory voters in traditional Tory seats. Why is Labour doing better? It must be because people like you have decided to change your vote after perhaps years, perhaps decades. I'd love to know why. But we can't have any discussion, I would suggest, about voting trends without examining the role of Reform Limited, our newest political party, which looks certain to pile on the agony for Rishi Sunak and the Tories. Recent polls have shown Reform Limited are ahead of the Tories in the north of England and in C2D2E demographics. But this latest poll suggests, I would suggest, another clear trend. Namely, in seats where the Tories are defending against Labour, Reform really eats into the Conservative vote, hugely by some 14 points. Ouch. But in seats where Labour is defending from the Tories, Reform only gains about 6 points on average, turning, as the Sunday Times notes, a decisive win for Labour at the next election into a landslide, with Labour on course to win, if I got this right, 175 of the 277 seats where it finished second to the Conservatives last time. Now, there is, I cannot deny it, there is lots more analysis in the Sunday Times, but I'd like us to digest really what's already on the table. Why is Labour doing not so well in urban areas it's held for ages? What's changing? It's been suggested in the Sunday Times it's Starmer's handling of the Gaza war, as well as his flip-flopping on key pledges like the £28 billion Green Revolution. That's apparently been a turn-off for metropolitan types. But I'm also, I can't deny, I'm genuinely curious as to why Reform looks certain to eat Tory votes in areas the Conservatives are defending from Labour, but Tice, Farage and co look far less threatening when the boot's on the other foot and it's Labour holding back the Tories. I can't quite get my head around that. Maybe it taps in to what Henry was saying earlier, that at local council level, there is a feeling amongst Tory supporters that the Conservative government in Westminster is too left-wing. So I am genuinely curious. 0345 6060 973 is the number. Will Labour, this is the overarching question, will Labour win the next election, or is it really more a case of the Conservatives losing it? Oh, and by the way, just as an adjunct, if the Tories should be worried in England, well, I mean, if you look at seats held by the SNP, Labour's vote share in Scotland is up 15 points, putting it on course to become Scotland's largest party once again. Well, Emma Revell is External Affairs Director at the Centre for Policy Studies, the think tank, and I'm delighted to say joins me this Sunday morning to discuss. Good morning, Emma.
Morning.
Morning. So, has the traditional voter had his or her day?
I think it is quite hard to sum up what a traditional Labour or traditional Tory voter is now. And I think that either group would be quite different from what you would think of as a traditional Labour or a traditional Tory voter,
Agreed.
say 20 years ago. So I think, yes, it is hard to sum up. And I think, the 2019 election and the changes in the red wall or the blue wall, however you want to talk about it, is one of the reasons it's quite hard to talk about what a traditional Tory voter specifically is now.
Is it less about parties and more about individual policies? I mean, everything I see with regards to reform success revolves around immigration and the Tory party's perceived failure to deal with immigration. Is it sort of single issue or perhaps just a handful of issues that are deciding things rather than a broad party umbrella?
I think it's difficult to say while you're in it. I think maybe
Agreed.
in 20 years we'll be able to look back and see a bigger trend. While it's happening, it's quite difficult. I think in 2019 it was quite obviously Brexit. A lot of people voted for Boris Johnson who perhaps wouldn't have voted for the Conservatives before. Even if, on paper, there's quite a lot of overlap there. They had a historical animus towards the Conservative Party that Boris Johnson was able to overcome because he would focus so much on getting Brexit done. I think, as you say, with reform, it will be immigration as a sort of main driver of people considering voting for reform, especially over the Conservative Party, where they feel the Conservatives haven't been able to be radical enough, in their view.
We obviously don't have a date for an election yet. Do you see these trends as being solid, that we're not going to see any great deviation between now and polling day, whenever it might be?
Yeah, I do think so. I think
there are quite a lot there's still a significant undecided factor, I believe, out there as well we should factor in.
Yeah, of course. And a lot of people, I think when a lot of Conservative MPs and activists specifically in the party will, I think, be holding on to the idea that polling for reform now doesn't mean voting for reform on election day, and that they might be able to persuade people that, look, voting for reform isn't going to get you a Reform MP. In many seats, it's only going to get you a Labour MP. And actually, you might be able to tempt some of those voters back for the Conservative Party. I don't know how likely that's going to be, and it sort of depends on the Conservative Party's election machine in the run-up to an election date, whenever that might be. So yeah, there is a lot of polling data now isn't voting data in the ballot box, and the local elections in a couple of weeks might give us a bit more of an indication as to how firm that vote actually is.
I suspect you're right on that last guy. Should be fascinating. Emma Revell, thank you. Let's go straight now to Sir John Curtice, the polling legend, Professor of Politics at the University of Strathclyde to boot. Good morning to you, Sir John.
Good morning to you, Matthew.
So do you see these as clear trends that are coming through this poll? Labour not doing so well in perhaps its urban strongholds, reform eating into the Tory vote where it's holding off a Labour threat. Are these clear trends?
They're clear trends, they're consistent trends, they're not new. They've been very clearly in evidence for at least the last 12 months. So certainly don't rely on arguments that say that this pattern has something to do with the reaction of some voters to the Gaza war or the Green.
Interesting.
For those of us who watch these things, we're going, why is everybody so surprised? Of course, this is what's happening. But the first thing I would say to you, Matthew, however, is that the focus for this story is not Labour. It is the Conservatives. I mean, let's just remember, first of all, on average, Labour in the opinion polls are up 10 points. The Conservatives are down by over 20 points. We are looking at an election where indeed the Conservatives are on course to lose much more than Labour to win. It's partly those figures I've just quoted you. The other reason why this is the case, there are two crucial events that are responsible for where we are now. The first is the initial revelations about Partygate back in December 2021. And the second is the Liz Truss fiscal event in September, October 2022. Virtually all of the change that's happened in party support occurred in the immediate wake of those two events. Now, then the other thing you have to realise is this: what we're talking about is the Conservative Party. Yes, it's true Labour are doing somewhat better in places which the Conservatives are defending, but the principal reason the thing that's going on is not a change in the geography of the Labour vote; it's a change in the geography of the Conservative vote. The Conservative vote is down by 26 points, according to this latest YouGov MRP poll in constituencies they're trying to defend against Labour, whereas they're only down by 13.5 points in wards where the Conservatives are second to Labour. Now, in part, this is simply arithmetic. There are about 80 constituencies where the Conservatives did not get 20% of the vote back in 2019, and where therefore it's impossible for the Conservative vote to fall by the 20 points or so that it's falling in the national opinion polls. It must therefore be the case that the Conservative vote is falling more heavily in places where they're previously strongest. But the second thing everybody seems to forget is this. Those figures you quoted about the change in the Reform vote are partly a consequence of the fact, remember, back in 2019, Nigel Farage decided that the Brexit Party was not going to fight the constituencies which the Conservatives were then defending, which are now the vast bulk of the seats the Conservatives were defending this time. So therefore, that 14-point figure for Reform is, for the most part, 14 points on nothing, whereas in Labour-held seats, Reform, the Brexit Party did fight last time, so the comparison is with the fact that there was already a Brexit. So the truth is, therefore, it's partly arithmetic. It's partly to do with the insistence by Richard Tice that Reform are going to fight everywhere, and they've got the candidates in place, although, by the way, they haven't. They're not fighting the local elections on a great extensive basis. And therefore, those two things are the things that are primarily driving what's going on. Matthew, again, none of this is new. If you go back to the polling and the pattern of local elections and the actual outcome of the 1997 general election, when the Tories ended up with 165 seats, very similar to the 155 that YouGov are now projecting, exactly the same geographical patterns were in place, except that, of course, then you didn't have the strength of Reform that you had in 1997.
Could I ask, do you detect, I'm very interested in sort of people who had traditional alignments with parties, and it just strikes me that perhaps people aren't looking at a party's umbrella policies. It's just one or two issues, immigration seems to me to be number one, particularly for the Tories in the north. Do you see it as that? Is it really for the parties, are they fighting on a very narrow platform?
I think, to be honest, whereas in 2019 it was an election about policy, it was about the policy of Brexit. The 2024 election is going to be a election about competence.
Yes.
I've already said to you, the crucial things were competence and ethics. The crucial things were Partygate and Liz Truss. Have the Conservatives, in the views of the electorate, provided us with a government that they feel has presided over what, of course, has been a very difficult situation because of the pandemic? How well have they handled this? Do they think that the opposition might be able to do a better job? This, I think, for most people is the central issue. And then behind that, it is who's going to improve the economy and who's going to improve the NHS.
You've given me a lot to work with there, Sir John. Appreciate it. I love the idea that it's about confidence and ethics this next election. That's something we can throw out to the listeners. Do you concur, ladies and gentlemen? Is it Partygate? Was it Liz Truss that might have changed your opinion? Sir John Curtice, thanks very much.